Hello Homeslices, it's Kiara with Homeslice Adulting, coming to you with my first ever video series. You are currently watching the very first installment of a series of videos on my thoughts and my experiences on going back to college as an adult. Now on Friday, I graduated from LSU with a bachelor's degree in business management with an entrepreneurship concentration. I am 27 years old and I am not and was not a traditional student while I was attaining my degree. Now, the definition of a traditional student is typically someone who enrolls in college right out of high school. They pursue their degree on a full-time basis and they complete a bachelor's degree within 4 to 5 years. And that just wasn't my experience. Now, I feel I have valuable insight into the world of returning to school as an adult because I have actually completed my degree and I can tell the story from beginning to end. I found that a lot of videos on YouTube of people who were talking about their experience as an adult returning to school didn't finish their degrees just yet. And so I feel like because I have attained my degree, I can take everything that I have learned and put it together for you guys in a more complete way so that you can walk away with a reasonable and realistic view of what it takes to go back to school as an adult and actually finish. Now, here's a disclaimer. Okay, the only thing that I can do is tell my story and tell you guys what I have learned as a non-traditional student who has finished her degree. I cannot certify that if you take my advice that you will have similar results. Also, I do not have any children and I cannot comment on what it's like to be a parent and a student at the same time. It doesn't mean that you won't find any of this information informative or valuable. I just want to make it clear that that's something that I really cannot comment on. With that being said, this first installment is going to be a little bit about my background and my story about why I didn't finish school in the first place. So I graduated from a high school in Texas in 2009 and I was offered a scholarship to go to LSU that would essentially cover all of my out-of-state fees. So basically, the scholarship allowed me to be treated like an in-state student even though I was an out-of-state student. Because I was such an excellent student in high school, I did not have the skills that it took to actually apply myself in college. And here's what I mean by that. If you're a great student in high school, chances are you're just good at memorization. You have never had to actually put forth real effort to getting good grades. So when you get to college, it's kind of a culture shock for you to see that I actually have to study to get good grades. And so that's what I mean by high school didn't necessarily prepare me for college. Now, my freshman year, the person who scheduled my classes for my first semester put me in organic chemistry. I had tested out of the general chemistry when I took my AP chemistry exam. So she put me in organic chemistry because I was a biochem major, but this was my freshman year. Any of you who are science majors know that organic chemistry is one of the hardest classes to study for and pass, and lots of people don't pass it. And I didn't pass it my freshman year. I mean, in addition to it being a super hard class, I didn't have the studying skills to actually pass the class. And that hurt my confidence a little bit because I was used to things coming to me a little bit more easily. Plus, I had to keep a 3.0 GPA in order to keep my scholarship, which I managed to do by making up for my failure in that class during the following semester. So my freshman year was okay. I did enroll into or not enroll, but I did join a student organization so that I can make friends. And some of the friends that I have made there are still my friends to this day. But anyways, sophomore year is when things started to kind of go down the drain. I can't tell you why, I cannot tell you how, but my motivation for school just went went all the way down the drain. I would sleep through classes, I wouldn't do homework, I would make last-ditch efforts to make reasonable grades. Things really just didn't go the way that they were supposed to go. I didn't go to class. Social events were more important than going to school and getting good grades. I lost my scholarship and ended up having to get a very large private loan for my next year of school. Now, the way I want to explain this is that the loan was $30,000. $15,000 was for a fall semester and $15,000 was for a spring semester. I did so poorly during the first fall semester that I canceled the second half of that loan because I knew that if my motivation wasn't where it needed to be, there was no reason for me to take on $15,000 of extra debt when I knew that mentally I was not prepared to continue college and trying to get the best grades. So I ended up deciding to leave school and to return home to Texas. And it was kind of a moment where I was hanging my head in shame. I will say that I know that I was not being completely honest with my family about why I was leaving school. Whenever they would ask how you're doing in school, I would say great, despite not, actually doing great in school. And because I was such a great student in high school, it was very shameful for me to leave have to leave college, and I was depressed for a little while after I returned home. When I returned home, I owed the university money because even though I took out that $5,000 loan for that last semester, that didn't cover all of my out-of-state fees. So I still did owe the university money, and they were not going to release my transcripts until I paid that money back. So I had to find a job to pay back the university so that I could eventually go back to school. Now, I got a job as a waitress at a Mexican restaurant, and I had to walk to work in the hot Texas sun. It was only about a mile of walking, but it was going there almost every day, 5 or 6 days a week, walking. It was just very annoying to me, but I was doing what I had to do to earn money. I got my first credit card that had an $800 limit on it while I was back home working, and I had saved up about $1,200, and I decided that with the money I had saved up, I could either get a car so that I could find a better job because I had increased mobility, or I can move back to Baton Rouge and get my in-state student status so that I could return to school. Because after having searched for a job in Texas, I realized I have to get a degree, because all of the jobs that were being offered to people with just high school diplomas were not paying well, and I knew that there was no way that I was going to get the type of job that I wanted to get without having a degree. So it became like, I didn't have any other option but to get a degree, and I needed to take every step that I could to move in that direction. So the idea came to me. I'm gonna say it was inspired by the Lord, because it just kind of came out of nowhere that I could use the money that I had saved up and that credit card to move back to Baton Rouge so that I could get my in-state status and eventually return to school. So I moved to Baton Rouge on September 1st of 2012 to an apartment that was near the campus, and I only had a 4-month lease from September 1st to December 31st. And I told myself that if I could not support myself throughout that 4-month lease, that I would return home. Again, hanging my head in shame. But I just wanted to know that I could be on my own for real and support myself on my own for real and take the steps that I needed to go back to school. So I reconnected with some friends, and I used the money that I had saved up and the credit card to support myself until I was able to get a job. Now, it took me about 7 weeks to find a job. And one of the reasons why it was difficult to find a job was because I did not have a car still. And so I needed a place that I could get to with public transportation or by walking. And eventually I found a job at a coffee shop that was up the street. And The thing happened though was when November of that year, during that 4-month lease came around, I was almost out of money. And even though I had secured the job as a barista at the coffee shop, my first paycheck was not going to be enough to cover the rent. So I was kind of worried about it, but I went to check my mail one day and my grandmother had sent me a check for the full amount of the rent for November to, you know, basically say, I support you in the things that you're doing to try to go back to school and moving out of your parents' house or whatever. And I was like, oh, thank you, Jesus. Because to me, it was like a ram in the bush. And it was the first confirmation that I got that I was doing the right thing by moving back to Baton Rouge instead of staying home in Texas. So that money that my grandmother sent me went to the rent, and it was able to tide me over until I was making money regularly as a barista at the coffee shop. Now, during the time that I was working at the coffee shop, I received a call from a collections agency, because even though I was making money when I was working as a waitress at the Mexican restaurant and while I was working as a barista, a lot of that money either went to saving up or it went to my expenses. And I got a call from the collections agency because I had not been paying on the money that I owed the university. So they asked me how much I would be able to put towards that, and it was $100 a month. And for me, it was just another bill, but it was a bill that I would have to pay off if I wanted to return to school. So that was all the more motivation for me to find a better job than working for minimum wage at a coffee shop. So I worked as a barista for 8 months, and during that time I was still looking for a better job. And so there was one job opening at the university for a communications officer with the university's police department. Communications officer is just a fancy way of saying dispatcher. And so I applied for the job twice, and I was denied for the job twice. And it was kind of a blow to my confidence a little bit. But the thing that motivated me to look at the university for employment was because people who work at the university for a year and who become permanent employees are able to get tuition reimbursement, which is essentially a discount on your tuition, and you're allowed to miss 3 hours of work per week to attend class. Now, in addition to this more than doubling the income that I was making at the coffee shop, I would also have benefits and basically have a discounted way to get my education. So after I was rejected for the second time, I was a little discouraged a little bit, but it come to find out that one of the people that they decided to hire was actually let go. And instead of posting a new opening, they just went back through some of the old applications and found mine. I was asked for an interview. I passed all of the tests. I got the job. I made it through training, and I am technically still working there right now. But the point is that I used my knowledge of the system to work something out, to actually get to a point to where I was able to actually get back into school and do it at a discounted rate. But we'll get to that a little bit later. Now, another great thing about getting this job at the university was because my pay was so much higher, I was able to put forth more money towards paying down the debt that I owed to the university, because I knew that I wanted to go back to school, but the money that I owed to the university would have to be paid off before I could officially go back. Now, one of the awesome milestones in my journey back to school was that after a year of living in Baton Rouge, I was able to submit documents to prove to the university that I was an in-state student, so that I would no longer be responsible for out-of-state tuition. So to me, that was like a victory, because at this point I had been out of school for almost 2 years, and being able to take a step in the right direction was a big part of me continuing, because once you get that momentum, you really shouldn't slow down. Now, I worked at the university for a year before I was eligible for the tuition reimbursement program, and it come to find out that had I been hired just a few days later, I would not have been able to take advantage of that program until the following semester. So things just worked out perfectly, you know, thank God. I returned to school. I was taking one class during the summer of 2014, and at the last minute they changed the class from a class that you actually have to attend in person to a class that you could take online. So I didn't even have to miss any work. Things kind of worked out pretty perfectly first semester of school. Now, I did have a discouraging roadblock during the first time that I had went back to school during that summer, because there's a rule that in order to be eligible for financial aid, you have to successfully complete 75% of all of the courses that you take. And because my grades were so poor, my ratio was a little less than 75%. It might have been like 72 or 73%. So I wasn't eligible for financial aid. So I decided to appeal that and basically tell them the reason why my grades were not where they were supposed to be, and they denied my appeal because the Office of Enrollment said that there were no extenuating circumstances. So essentially I had to wait, and I was put on probation for it was technically 6 months, because the probation does not count summer school. So I was put on probation for that first semester until I was able to get my ratio higher or at 75%. So to me, that was like another blow to my confidence. My feelings were really hurt, but I was able to finagle my way out of that by getting better grades. Now, the time that it took for me to enroll back in school after having left took about 2.5 years. So throughout this whole process, it took me 2.5 years to get back into school part-time. And you know, that is the gist of my story about why I had to leave school and the start of how I had to get back. There's definitely more to the story, but I wanted to divide this up into different parts and pieces because I knew this story was going to be very long. So the first thing I want to say is I hope that you have found just even a little tiny bit of my story that you identify with, and I hope that you can take something from it and learn something from it, because no matter what your journey has been, you can be successful in attaining your degree the same way that I have. So I hope that you found some type of inspiration or some type of quality of my story that's similar to yours, just so you can get the right encouragement that you need in order to start accomplishing your goal of attaining a degree if that's what you want to do. Now stay tuned for part 2 of this series, where I talk about my tips, tricks, and a little bit more of my story about how I was able to go throughout the duration of my college career and get really good grades. Now, as far as my business college courses go, I was able to get a GPA of 3.97, which I think is wonderful. You should definitely stay tuned to part number 2 of the series, where I talk about all of the tricks and tips and things that I use and things that I have learned throughout my journey while I was in school. You'll hear a little bit more about my story, but mostly you'll hear about some of the things that you need to take into consideration before you decide to go back to school or while you are in school. Thank you guys for watching, and definitely stay tuned for part number 2. Peace out, Homeslices.